very few people ever actually suss out what safety means to them. They get into relationships, they get into friendships, they meet people, and they care more about the spark than they do about what's going on in their body. And that is a massive disservice.
When you really get into the throngs of whether or not we have a good safety radar, it's not about whether or not we do or don't. It's more about how well do we not override the cues that tells us a relationship is dangerous. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode.
Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia. Bianca and I are interestingly excited, I would say. Bianca, how do you feel about this episode?
I am nervous and excited, which is always a good sign.
I love that. So you and I had done a group coaching session, for lack of better words, one of two. So by the time we're recording this right now, by the time that we will launch this, it's going to be well after the second part of this cohort or of this session. And essentially, for anyone that's new joining Evolve, group coaching is one of our programs that we do once a year at Evolve. And it is super helpful for anyone who is on the growth journey to be around other people who are too. Because let's be real, the growth journey, when you're evolving, it is lonely and it's not easy to really, really behind the scenes acknowledge how other people are going through similar things when you don't have an external cue that really does show that. So group coaching is one of those places, trauma-informed safe spaces, that helps you have that external validation that you're not alone on this growth journey. And out of 9 different sessions, we call them growth sessions, spread out over 3 months. It's crazy. It goes by so fast. We have 10 individuals get in the room, and we shout out to you guys if you're listening. You know who you are, this cohort, the worthy evolutionaries. We have set content and a set curriculum to help take each member through a growth journey in and of itself. And the last session that Bianca, you and I had done was safe relating. And there's 2 parts of this section, for lack of better words. It is, how do we make sure that we understand what safety is in relating to others, and what is intuition, and how do we utilize our intuition to be able to discern between a safe enough relationship and one that is dangerous. And the second part is really going to be grounded in overriding the override signal that essentially says, hey, this person doesn't seem to be safe, but I'm going to try to find out anyways at my own expense. So this conversation that you and I are going to have is really getting into the throngs and adding a little bit of spice, to use your words, to this conversation around how to know if a relationship is safe. And more importantly, from my perspective, I want every listener walking away, scrolling away with something that helps their consciousness lock in on the level of safety that is important to them, that makes sense for them. Because this is something that I had mentioned to you, Alan and I, at the Conscious Couples podcast. We actually had done an episode about this specifically in intimate relationships. How do you know if your intimate relationship is safe? And he and I spoke about that. But what I said on that episode, that I think came out a couple weeks now by the time this launches, was that safety is also subjective. So while my safety definition, to what you had said a little bit earlier, my safety definition might be a little bit different than yours, Bianca, there are fundamental principles when it comes to any relationship, intimate or otherwise, that are important for us as individuals to know about ourselves and what matters most underneath that. So Bianca, where do you want to get us started? And if you care to share what your definition to current known awareness is of safety, maybe that could be helpful to lead by example.
Ooh, you're putting me on the spot. Okay, hold on.
So what does safety mean to you?
Nervous system regulation. So if my nervous system feels regulated and in a ventral vagal state around you, and my protectors aren't pinging off because they unconsciously feel threatened, then I feel safe.
Beautiful.
I know I just spewed some jargon, so can we elaborate on
I'm going to.
what? Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So for anyone, so we don't realize sometimes that we do spew the jargon that is natural to like the clinician hat. But Bianca just mentioned ventral vagal and central nervous system, right? Regulation. So also known as what I call lobster bagel. And yes, I did just do a little lobster
You're so
kind of clasping. So Alan and I have called the rest and relaxation state, also known as ventral vagal state, where you feel a sense of calm in your nervous system, you're rejuvenating, and you're getting like energized through that rest. That is essentially what is known as ventral vagal state, which is where you have capacity. And we've talked about this in former episodes, Bianca. You're at like a green level of capacity where in ventral vagal state, you feel calm, you feel in control, you know what is going on in your body, you know what's going on around you, and you're lobster bageling, for lack of better words. You feel good, you feel safe, you feel calm. And lobster bagel is just a joke on words that Alan and I have started to share. And it is funny. So it brings that sense of knowing to when you're in that calm state. So for Bianca, what she's essentially communicating is a safe relationship to her and for her central nervous system is acknowledging what she's been through, acknowledging her set of experiences, and doing so because of that conditioning. When she feels safe, secure, grounded, and in a feel-good state, that is what is an indicator of a safe relationship.
And not just feel good, but I feel as though I can be my truest, most authentic self. So I don't have to puff up and expand. I don't have to shrink and collapse and protect myself. I am in a space where I can just be who I am at my essence. And something I want to say just really quick, this is not, please correct me if I'm wrong. I've been listening to the book, The Art of Seduction. It's just fascinating. It's a fascinating book. Yeah. And in seduction, in romance, in the early stages of relationship, one of the things that he talks about in that book is like, you're basically playing a game the whole time. It's not about safety. It's not about regulation. It's about playing the game. And while I don't suggest everyone become like expert seducers and whatnot, there is something to be said about, you know, you do show up a little bit differently in the beginning of a relationship when you're first meeting somebody, or in the beginning of a friendship when you're first meeting somebody. So I think a cool question to get us started off with is, how do you balance those two? How do you stay safe internally? How do you feel grounded, regulated, feeling as though you're showing your authentic self, while also mating, dating, courting, doing the intro work of a relationship, business relationship, friendship, whatever, doing all of that at the same time? I know that's a nuanced question, but I also think it's a question people don't know to ask. And it's not something I would have known to ask back in the day, but it was something I struggled with. So
for sure,
let's get started with that.
Yeah. When we really like break that apart, we're kind of focusing in on the social dynamics, if you will. Mm-hmm. So social and interpersonal relationships, interpersonal relating in general. And it's often, if you kind of put that sub-segment of intimate and courting and mating and whatever, right, which is a very animalistic term, and Robert Greene's work is very much on the end of just really looking at said animalistic evolutions within our species. And when it comes to that, there's at different levels of EQ, IQ, SQ, somatic intelligence. EQ is emotional intelligence. IQ is intellectual intelligence or intellectual quotient, like an SQ is somatic quotient. So essentially, like all of these awarenesses as a human, you can develop, right? That's why personal and professional development is something that is so valuable in the world because, well, I would say in the world for a specific outcome, not necessarily super popular, right? People love dipping their toe into quote unquote personal development, the fluffy stuff. But when it actually comes down to the actual work that's consistency and challenging and pain and not so fun, that's where a lot of people dip out.
Yeah.
And when we think about this from a species standpoint, our brain capacity has more capacity to develop our levels of intelligence as human beings, right? And there's multiple forms of intelligence. And when we think about that, the different game of social intelligence and social games and dating games and whatnot differ. So and I kind of want to frame this in more practical realm rather than theoretical and conceptual for individuals. When you're in 4th or 5th grade and it's Valentine's Day, there's quote unquote social games that happen at school is a great example, right? People, I recall like different Valentine gifts, like all these things. And those are behaviors, those are quote unquote games that happen as a result of that person's, a 5th grader's levels of intelligence, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, somatic intelligence. And then we go about and do these behaviors. Some people then develop into adults who are actually emotional, maturational adults, and they start to learn, oh, 5th grade Valentine's is a little not the way in which I'm going to actually meet my life partner and quote unquote go about that dating game, quote unquote, in that same way. You can't just send over, or ask for someone's address or whatnot and send them a Valentine's Day. That's probably going to freak them out, right? So like balancing the safety component with the quote unquote gaming component of matchmaking, for lack of better words, it requires you to apply a different level of skill set. And in that level of skill set, when you're developing, you hopefully over time, as you develop, understand that at a baseline level, individuals need to feel a sense of safety because there's an actual need of safety. So when you're out in the dating game at 26, 30 years old, it's a very different quote unquote game because you're realizing that people have 20 years of dating or 20 years of social history that is literally coming with them. That's why everyone says, well, I have a lot of baggage, right? When they're in their like 30s and 40s, it's a totally different game. So how do you balance that? One of the biggest things that I can say is recognizing that human beings are a collection of their experiences, and they come to that moment when you're interacting as human beings, just like anyone listening to this podcast. You as a listener will have a collection of experiences that has unconsciously your brain saying, I don't feel safe with them, or I feel safe with them. It's unconscious, right? And if we're smiling, if we're validating, and if you're resonating with this, your central nervous system will feel safe with us because of your set of experiences. But let's say, for example, you were in school and you had a really negative experience with a woman who's white with blue eyes and my quote unquote hair that's in a bun. You might unconsciously not feel safe. And so balancing that is recognition of human being needs at the upper and lower limitations, if you will, of the biological, physiological, sociological, emotional needs that they have of safety, while also recognizing that there's dopamine and dopaminergic response systems that have been literally evolutionarily designed to have the quote unquote gamification play, also known as play within desire, within seduction, within mating practices, within social dynamics. There is an unconscious need that is within all of our human biologies to have a sense of play when it comes to connection. And that's that hormone anandamide, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, is that dopaminergic response to have us seeking out the gamification of connection. AKA when you talk to someone that you feel safe with, you feel good about it. It's not just an intellectual feeling. It's an actual chemical, electrical, quote unquote, experience.
So you can only play the game to the degree that you feel safe. Like safe with the person. Like if I was
put a qualifier on there, to the degree that you're conscious. Yeah, I think that there's a level of conscious awareness. Yeah. Keep going.
Cool. Okay.
What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say you can only really like court or be courted as long as you feel a semblance of safety, meaning you have no inherent fear or concern that you are going to be harmed.
I think that that's fair to say. I also know that some people mistake safety when it comes to like social games, be it dating or be it workplaces or be it friendships or whatever. And I think they mistake safety because they have safety cue mismatches. And I also think that when you can be quote unquote court and you can play the game and you can quote unquote go into this compliance state because consent and safety aren't the same thing for you because you didn't grow up with consent and safety being synonymous. For example, when you're younger, safety for you also included you consenting. And I'm not saying to anything sexual or intimate. I'm talking about at a very base level when you were younger and as you were developing in your household. What did you experience? Did you experience someone asking you, parents asking you, siblings asking you, a basic bid system of getting your thoughts, getting your feelings, getting your emotions, asking for things to where it's waiting until your consent is given? Let's say just very, very, very simple. A sibling asks you if they can borrow your clothing. That ask allows consent to be present. A parent asks you, do you want to get a haircut today? Do you want a haircut, right? Like those basic questions turn into consent. And where there's consent, there is inherent safety because in that question asking, an honoring of an individual's decisions and individual's choices, you unconsciously have a central nervous system that is set up to qualify safety in that realm. Now, many people, trust me, I have had many conversations with individuals where the lack of that, the lack of the way in which they were treated growing up by their parents, by their siblings, by the social systems that they were involved with, there's always a power dynamic. And so that quote unquote gamification that happens in a lot of relationships around the art of seduction is actually a power play on power dynamics where consent is or is not. Now, when it comes to safety in relationships, whether or not we're talking about intimate or otherwise, for your central nervous system to be acknowledge that it has its own needs separate from someone else is a baseline knowing that someone isn't going to or is going to be mindful of the threat that they induce upon you, the hurt, the harm, or the neglect that they induce upon you, which is a common thread of what is and what determines foundational safety. Number one is it's an acknowledgement that you as an individual autonomous human being has needs. And those needs are separate than this other person that either you're matching with or you're connecting with or you're trying to be friends with. That's the number one principle. There's an acknowledgement that determines safety, that you have needs that are separate from someone else, and those needs matter.
This is going to piss you off. It pissed me off. I saw this video. This like Middle Eastern barber, he puts on this like eccentric show every time he does it, and he's like cheesing and it's like the same song in the background, and he makes like this whole spectacle every time he's cutting the person's hair.
A performer.
Yeah, he's literally a performer. Mm-hmm. But there was this video that went out where this little boy with hair as long as mine, the father wanted to cut the kid's hair. This kid is like 5 years old, maybe 6 at most. This kid is hysterically screaming and crying. And they're like holding this kid down as the guy is like doing all of this like fanatical shit in the background, trying to cut his hair and making a game out of it and whatever.
Yeah.
And it drove me nuts because this poor child clearly does not feel safe. This poor child is clearly in this radical state of distress. For whatever reason, even if it's something small to a child's nervous system, it felt threatening. It felt dangerous, and his need was clearly bypassed due to the desire of the parent to cut this kid's hair. So he's hysterically screaming and crying, and the father is like holding him down, and this guy's in the fucking background. Oh, sorry. This guy is in the background, like dancing and making fun of it, and like he's not making fun of it, but like trying to maintain this persona.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many of us grew up in homes where our needs were not acknowledged, where our feelings of safety were dismissed, where it didn't matter what we wanted. What mattered was, what does the parent want? I can't tell you the amount of clients, and you and I have talked about this about our personal lives, where if you don't go hug that person in your family that makes you desperately uncomfortable, you're punished. If you don't go do the
or directly.
No, directly. It's like you're shamed for it. It's like, oh my God, nothing's wrong. You're being dramatic, da 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 da. If you don't want to go do something that's outside of alignment, and you're forced into it. If you want to do something that feels right for you, you're shamed and ridiculed for it. So as a child, you're basically learning, oh, my safety doesn't matter, to your consent component. Oh, okay, consent doesn't matter. What I need does not matter. My experiences, my thoughts, my feelings do not matter. That ends up translating into every adult relationship that you have.
Yeah.
And now someone might see that video and it's like, oh, it's fine. The kid will get over it. Maybe, but look at the amount of distress that was induced on that kid. Because what they really should have done was stop the freaking video and sit the kid down and console them. Help this child to regulate their nervous system.
Right.
And then bring them back to it. Now, I'm not saying get into a power dynamic with your child. Like if your kid is doing something unsafe and you need to like guide them, that's one thing. But if you're forcing your kid to do something they don't want to do because of your vanity or whatever, that's radically different. Now, this ends up becoming a challenge in adulthood where we don't know what safety means because we never were modeled it. We never were demonstrated it, and we are chronically bypassing the signals that we are experiencing. So as adults, how do we know what safety is? Just the benchmark definition, with the understanding that it's going to look a little bit nuanced based on our gender, based on where we grew up, based on our culture, based on where we're living, so on and so forth. Number one, how do we know what safety really is? And to the other point that you made, number two, how do we stop bypassing it?
The first thing that comes up, and we talked about this in group coaching, and I'm going to continue to echo this because what you're sharing, like I can't tell you how many people, and I'm sure listeners listening to this are going back to their own micro traumatic experiences of something like that, whether they were forced on a circus ride or something, or they were forced to get their hair cut, or they were forced to do something that they didn't want to do. Right, their needs were neglected and overrode. So the first thing really comes down to what a safe relationship is your needs are acknowledged. And so what does that actually translate to is when there's a signal that something's not safe or that it's disruptive, distressful to the nervous system, that signal is not bypassed or not overridden, because to what you just said, there's very convenient to whose benefit, the parents' benefit, that children will override the signals of their own intuition. And so they learn the skill of overriding that signal then, as opposed to learning the skill of attunement to that signal and being able to communicate what their needs are and how they can negotiate for those needs. People talk about the terrible twos all the time. And what actually is that? Terrible twos is actually a child's individuation for the first time, right? Maybe ever, where they recognize that they're an individual person and they have their own autonomy. And parents don't like that because that requires them to either develop the skill set of attunement to that safety signal and communication skill sets to be able to help those needs get met, which, by the way, to a parent, that's definitely a ton of effort, for sure. Not invalidating that at all. Or teach the kid to override the safety signals and to shut their trap when it comes to being able to get their needs met, because at the end of the day, that doesn't matter and that's too effortful. And so as we really look at this, like how to know if a relationship is safe, you can gauge it based on the level of override that you're doing to your own nervous system of that danger signal. So let's take this out to like an adult relationship, for example.
I was going to say, because there's an inherent understanding or idea that you know when it comes up.
Mm-hmm. You're not going to know it, but you're going to experience the consequences of it. So for example, you have someone that you're dating and all of a sudden they want to, let's say in the dating context, they want to kiss you. And in the moment, you and your parts kind of went into compliance mode and non-consent mode, because it wasn't like there was any like asking. It was more so like the person leaned in to get some smuckers, and it was like the second date. So the narrative starts to go in, oh, well, this is what people do, blah, 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 instead of actually, right, checking in with your nervous system. So what happens? You're dealing with the consequences. You're driving home and you're checking in the car. It's like, I didn't really want that. Like, and you're starting to have the quote unquote aftermath of, did I like, whoa, you're checking in on your needs later in the car. So you're not going to inherently know that, right? Why? Because it's a skill attunement to your own needs. And you're not going to get good at that right away. That's messy action. That's having the courage and the bravery and the humility and the vulnerability with oneself in the aftermath of something that you're dealing with the consequences of that signal override, to go, whoa, let's stop for a second and let's listen to what those signals were. When did I unconsciously notice that safety radar was going off? Oh, we're walking to our car. I started to get a little nervous. Like it was that nervous. And then I was more concerned about that person and how they were walking or the close proximity to me than I was about acting on my own signals, right? So it's that's the first, I would say, component to that. That will slowly help you develop the attunement to the precursor for where you could make a different decision in the future.
So start getting into the habit of doing a reflection in the aftermath.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For sure. With the intent, and I have to say this, to use those lessons in the future situations that you'll find yourself in. Because if you're just in a reflective component and you never translate that into behavioral activation in other scenarios, and you never kind of put yourself in the ring, you're never going to be able to actually qualify if a relationship is safe or not, because that would require you to actually acknowledge your own needs, which is why most people get in relationships that are unsafe in the first place, because they don't even acknowledge that their needs matter and that they are the sole person responsible for meeting those needs. And safety is a critical component of those needs.
Okay. What can people do if they start to notice that they're in a relationship that doesn't completely feel safe? What are some steps that they can take?
Yeah. So when you are in a relationship or you find yourself kind of caught in the throngs of that, and let's say, for example, the first principle that we talked about, which was in a safe relationship, your needs are acknowledged and ultimately they're worked towards getting met in a safe relationship. And you find yourself, you're in a relationship where it's like, oh, shoot, that first principle is not there. My needs are neglected. My core needs, they're ignored. They're neglected. And you start to kind of tune into that, and you're in these aftermath repeats play, and you're like, huh, that's interesting. The first thing that I would have anyone do is ask the question to themselves, where does that neglect first start? Is it with that person or is it with ourselves? And I say that because more often than not, we're in relationships that are unsafe because we're not neglecting the need for our own safety, or we are not acknowledging the need for our own safety. And then we are, like I said, in the consequences, the aftermath of that lack of acknowledgement within ourselves, and the people that we are in relation with have just learned to have that be okay. So as soon as you discern which chicken or the egg, usually it's you. And then that's when we can start to actually make nuanced differences of bringing it to someone else's attention, and then making actual change, right? Like just like in an intimate relationship, I'll be sitting down with a couple. There's something that they're experiencing in the dynamic, and I always go within. What within you made it okay to go over and pick up his laundry before you went to the bathroom? Something as small as that. Because that's a small indicator of you overriding your biological need to go to the bathroom. What made it okay within you to go and give that person $2 instead of actually going to your car when you told yourself unconsciously that this doesn't feel safe? What within you made that okay, right? And not to shame, not to guilt, not to blame, but more so to understand, just like a scientist would, what is actually the root of this unsafe relationship.
Cool. Awesome. Final takeaway?
The final takeaway would be in the one aspect that I want to make sure that kind of makes this complete. How to know if a relationship is safe. A really great measuring stick too, that is not talked about in my opinion, is how quickly after a rupture, right? So after a fight, or after a tiff in a friendship, or after something bad happens, right? You're in the consequence. How quick is this relationship to repair? Go into what's called the repair process. And we've talked about this in past episodes, because the quickness component is an indicator of someone's emotional maturity, someone's ability to respect you as an individual autonomous person, and someone to really have an understanding of a healthy relationship, a safe relationship, unconsciously will prioritize repair over individual momentary feelings. Why? Because a safe relationship knows that repair is critical. That doesn't mean that it's excusing behaviors or whatnot, but repair is most important because this is a long-term relationship, and long-term relationships, safe long-term relationships, directly correlate to our overall well-being, levels of happiness, levels of fulfillment and joy. And so our time to repair in a relationship that is safe is a great measuring stick. So ask yourself the question in closing: when I have a rupture, or when I have a conflict, or when I have a differing of opinions, do I feel like I get hung out on the clothesline, left to die, and we never revisit this conversation, this conflict, this rupture in our relationship because that person chooses not to, or because they refuse to take ownership, or they are incapacitated in their own egos to the point where they will choose relational distancing and shaming techniques over actual repair? That is a great measuring stick of a safe relationship, because those who are safe will be quick to repair, regardless of their egos, regardless of what happened. And I'm not saying like overnight, but definitely within like a week, right? Like that, I would say like that's fair. Okay. Your closing thoughts?
Great. Just like every other thing we talk about on this show, it's a skill.
Yeah.
The far majority of us were never taught what safety looks like. The far majority of us were never taught what safety feels like. So it is going to be a process of understanding. How do I know if I feel safe in my own body? How do I know if I feel safe out with others? And then how do I ensure that I maintain safety and that I'm not bypassing my feelings and experiences? It's a skill. Don't expect yourself to be good at it overnight. You're not going to be. And that's okay. Take evolve steps, take some belief steps, let it take the time that it needs, and eventually you will get there and you will continue getting there. There's no end goal to this. It's an ongoing, evolving process.
Lifelong process. We had a digital asset that I created for the Conscious Couples podcast for individuals and listeners who could do like a safety scorecard. I'm going to create a very similar one, evolve based, for anyone that's listening to download and to be able to use in their own set of experiences to gauge on their own accord if a relationship is safe using the 3 fundamentals of relational safety. So click the link in the show notes if you want that. That'll be a great resource. And in closing, my episode suggestion is 438, understanding trauma responses you mistake for personality. Bianca?
439, how to tell if you're in a situationship that's damaging you. We hope you enjoyed this episode. A lot of information packed in here, so make sure you listen to it a couple of times. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.